Final Fantasy is loved the world over. It is one of the most popular and recognizable gaming brands on the market. Every title that gets released becomes a top seller. Not every entry is great, or even good. That is why we at Gamerversity are taking it upon ourselves to gather all the intel possible and provide you with this official list of the best Final Fantasy games that have been released. Sit back, grab your chocobo, and let's get into this. Number 10. Final Fantasy. In 1987, Square was about to go to the land down under. I'm talking about bankruptcy, not Australia. Their entire future depended on this one last shot, their Final Fantasy. It obviously worked, as 30 years later they have made a ton of Final Fantasy games, as well as a lot of other gems. The original Final Fantasy, while somewhat archaic in its battle system and story today, was revolutionary at the time. This game required thinking and strategizing to succeed in ways that games like Dragon Quest didn't. You can't just button mash your way to victory. You have to use the right attack, the right spell, and combine it all to a well-deserved victory. The story and characters were basic compared to modern RPGs, but at the same time solidified the template for most RPGs that came after. Final Fantasy is a good, solid game. It may not be great, but there are still 9 other Final Fantasy games on this list that are superior to this first outing. Number 9. Final Fantasy III. Final Fantasy III is the 9th game on this list. And I'm not talking about the North American version, but the true Japanese version. The American version of Final Fantasy III is actually Final Fantasy VI, as Square messed with the number system as some of the games weren't released in North America. All of the games have been re-released over the years, so the original North American numbering system has pretty much become invalid. Final Fantasy III was the last 8-bit NES Final Fantasy game to be released. This game is similar to the first game. You play as the 4 warriors of light that must save the world by finding the 4 crystals that represent the 4 elements. This game also introduces the job system, and trust me, this is more exciting than burger flipping or cleaning waste. You can be a summoner, a bard, a dragoon, and much more. You can change jobs anytime, improving the customizable aspect of the series. Final Fantasy III was taking the series in a positive direction, and it wouldn't be too long until the true Final Fantasy masterpiece would be released, but we'll get to that in a bit. Number 8. Final Fantasy V. Final Fantasy V was originally not released in North America. Nintendo of America considered the game too hard for Americans, plus Final Fantasy IV didn't exactly move big numbers. It's not until Final Fantasy VII came out that an American audience fell in love with RPGs on a larger scale. Final Fantasy V is notable for stepping up the job system and making it great. Jobs level up separately with ability points that are gained at the end of battle. You can change jobs on the fly and even add elements from other jobs into the job you're using by taking advantage of that extra slot of happiness. Well, that's what I call it, at least. You can have a monk with the abilities of a thief, or a thief that can master time and space like the Doctor. It's a real joy to go through the combinations. This game also gave us the Blue Mage. The Blue Mage has offensive and defensive capabilities. Final Fantasy V, like 1 and 3 above, falls short of greatness due to arguably the weak story and the characters. It's not a bad story though, it's intentionally lighter and more comedic. But Final Fantasy is also capable of so much more. Number 7. Final Fantasy X. Final Fantasy X is a strange beast. It's brilliant, and then it's meh. Then brilliant, then meh. Wash, rinse, repeat. This game is huge on attention to detail. The world and story are very fleshed out. The characters are also very well defined. Many of the characters can also get annoying as they're hard to listen to, including the lead character Titus. And then he's not. All of a sudden Titus is an interesting character again, and I want to see what happens next. The Sphere Orb upgrade system is a lot of fun, and it really makes you want to upgrade. The battle system is very deep and rewarding. It's also somewhat stiff and boring. For me, the battle system was great at first, but after about 60 hours, I found it hard to sit through it, which is rare for a game like this. I can usually stay engaged the whole time, be it 30 or 300 hours. I didn't really like Blitzball all that much, but I have to give it props as it is a very deep and well-made system. I just personally didn't care for it. Blitzball is an added touch. It's a sport that you can engage in for fun and profit, like kind of underwater parkour soccer. I could go on for a while longer about this game as there's so much to talk about, but I don't have the time here, and I would like to conclude by saying Final Fantasy X is a flawed masterpiece. Number 6. Final Fantasy XV. Final Fantasy XV had an interesting journey. It was originally going to be a spin-off title for Final Fantasy XIII called Final Fantasy XIII Versus. After many years of development and countless delays, the game was changed to be the 15th and most current entry in the series. This game takes a more realistic approach to its world. It's a mix of our world with some fantasy science fiction concepts and a good amount of monsters. You play as Prince Noctis, who must reclaim his throne and save the world. The characters are all very well done, and the story is great. This is a world that many, including myself, just want to explore and uncover all of its secrets. The main transportation is a car. That's right, the main transportation is a car in a Final Fantasy game. Driving can be nice here and there, but it really takes forever to get anywhere, so you are just waiting to use that sweet, sweet fast travel. And of course there's Chocobos, so that's pretty cool too. The game is massive with a decent sized main quest and over 200 side quests. You will be playing this for quite a while. If you haven't played this one yet, get the Royal Edition, as it is the complete version of this game. Number 5. Final Fantasy IV. Final Fantasy IV once again has you chasing crystals. You play as Cecil, the Dark Knight of the Kingdom of Baron. Cecil commands the airship brigade, the Red Wings. Cecil has to do some less than heroic things on order of the king and has a crisis of conscience. After confiding his feelings to the king has Cecil removed from his command and sends him off to be an errand boy to deliver a package to a faraway land. Then this starts off Final Fantasy IV. This is the first Final Fantasy game to have a fully fleshed out story and characters, and they did a marvelous job with it. The Super Nintendo Final Fantasies were something special. It's really the only generation where the graphics seem truly timeless, as they aged very well. The original NES looks too simple, and everything that came after kind of suffers from the graphical advancements that follow. That's only a critique on the graphics, though, which really doesn't matter, as it's not what it's all about. It's a great game. The biggest problem is that they made the North American version too simple compared to the Japanese version, because once again they thought Americans couldn't handle it. Number 4. Final Fantasy XII. Final Fantasy XII is a great entry into the series despite some issues. The main issue is the story and the characters. They are very uneven. The gameplay is great, and it's a lot of fun to explore this sort of open-world MMO style game and kill everything you see. The combat is very addictive. It's like video game corn pops. Once you pop, you can't stop. Final Fantasy XII provides a lot of new innovation to the series. The seamless battle system is new and usually something you'd only see in an MMO as opposed to a console RPG. The controllable camera was also a series first. You had the Gambit system, which had you controlling the AI of the characters in combat. It was kind of like a programming class using if and then statements. If this character's MP falls below, say, 70%, then cast an ether. A license system controls what abilities and equipment a character can use and at what point they become available. The license system is pretty much useless, and it serves to unnecessarily hinder the player. And this works as a point against the game, but it doesn't hurt it all that much. Final Fantasy XII did very well, selling over 7 million copies, including the PS4 re-release. This game has its haters, and they bring up good points, but if you can get past this, the game is actually pretty damn good. Number 3. Final Fantasy VII. Final Fantasy VII is a masterpiece title. The story, combat, characters, battle system, setting, fun factor, it's almost perfect. All the characters have story arcs and a real personality. This was Square's most ambitious game. It took over 120 programmers and artists to complete the project, and it was the most expensive game ever made at that point. After inflation, it had a $70 million budget, and Sony more than matched that with an additional $100 million ad campaign. That was unheard of at the time. Everybody was expecting a breakthrough title, something that would shake the foundation and change the gaming landscape. Anything less would be a failure. Square delivered the goods, and they did it brilliantly. Everybody was happy. Most importantly, the gamers. This game made RPGs mainstream. The amount of RPGs on the original PlayStation can be brought back to this title. Final Fantasy VII changed everything, but there are still 2 games that are better, even if they did have less of an impact. Number 2. Final Fantasy IX. Final Fantasy IX is such a great gaming experience, I just don't know where to begin. Let's start with the look, the graphics. Final Fantasy VII and VIII had a more realistic, gritty style, and this game threw all that out the window and gave people something a little more classic, something a little more medieval European fantasy, just like the earlier titles. Everyone was drinking their awesome juice during development because this game is actually better than Final Fantasy VII. The cast is fantastic in this game, and they all play great off of each other, and there is a good amount of opportunity for each character to have their own story and many excellent moments. The game handles light and dark themes very well and maintains a tightrope balance throughout the whole experience for the best possible excellence. The level of customization has improved for equipment and stats. Equipment will affect the stats of the characters. There is also a new synthesizing feature where you can break down old weapons and create new ones. You also get 4 characters. Final Fantasy is always better with 4 characters. Final Fantasy IX is a true classic that will stand the test of time. I'm sure it will be updated and re-updated until one day it's on the 10th remake on the PlayStation 20. Number 1. Final Fantasy VI. Final Fantasy VI. One word. Epic. Final Fantasy VI takes a step back from the fantasy theme of the previous games. It adds an Industrial Revolution era mix to the fantasy. The characters and story are the best the series has to offer. This game is packed with so much depth, nuance, and emotion that it will be very difficult to put down that controller. The world and the setting is very well defined, and it has a graphical polish that leaves the previous entries in the dust. They used every trick to get the most out of the Super Nintendo for this one. They used Mode 7 rendering to great effect. The main villain Kefka is very memorable and has a tragic and interesting story. Kefka would definitely rank in the top 3 Final Fantasy villains. The character customization is great. Any character can learn any ability, but the effectiveness of that ability is based on their stats. Final Fantasy VI is the finest vintage that must be savored. What are your favorite Final Fantasy games? What brings back the best Sid Levin gaming memories? Let us know in the comments and keep on fantasizing.